We begin today with breaking news in the Jeffrey Epstein case. The disgraced financier's longtime confidant has been arrested nearly 1 year after Epstein was taken into custody on federal sex trafficking charges. Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested earlier today by federal agents in New Hampshire. The British socialite is accused of conspiring with Epstein to sexually abuse minors. Maxwell is facing 6 separate charges, including conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in sexual acts, transportation of a minor with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, and 2 counts of perjury. Earlier, acting United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Audrey Strauss, explained her role in the sex trafficking scheme.
Maxwell was among Epstein's closest associates and helped him exploit girls who were as young as 14 years old. Maxwell played a critical role in helping Epstein to identify, befriend, and groom minor victims for abuse. In some cases, Maxwell participated in the abuse herself.
Maxwell has long been tied to Epstein and allegedly began helping him identify and exploit minors beginning in 1994. Today's charges are the latest in the ongoing investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, who famously committed suicide while in custody last August ahead of his trial. CBS News legal expert and analyst Rikki Klieman joins me now. Hi, Rikki. Great to see you. So Maxwell has been tied to Epstein for years, and we know that many of Epstein's victims had named her publicly. I think a lot of people who've been following this case sort of wondered where the investigation was going in terms of Maxwell. Do investigators now say they'd had their eye on her all this time?
Yes. What they say is that it has taken them a considerable amount of time to put together a case that goes back to 1994. And that makes perfect sense, that you can't just look at something that happened last week. You have to go back decades, and you have to go through each step of the process so that you know when your indictment finally comes down that it really is airtight. And what we saw in that press conference, what we heard, was the outlines of an indictment that is really, really detailed. And what you have are 6 counts here. It's not only the overriding conspiracy with Jeffrey Epstein to bring young girls, some as young as 14, but clearly minors under the age of 18, that Ghislaine Maxwell knew were under the age of 18, to groom them, to seduce them, to entice them, to be available, apparently, according to the indictment, to Jeffrey Epstein, also with participation of Ghislaine Maxwell, and also be available to other men of the rich and powerful class. The indictment is as distasteful as the acts that we have learned about over the last 2 years. And I have to say, this is a mighty day of reckoning indeed, that Ghislaine Maxwell has finally been brought to the courts.
And does the indictment give you a sense of the depth of the evidence prosecutors might have against her?
Yes, and I think it is truly in depth. You know, we had heard a lot about Ghislaine Maxwell really dealing with the allegations of one of the victims, Virginia Giuffre, who has been open, vocal, had filed a civil suit. So we know about her. But it certainly sounds like there are many, many victims who are saying that Ghislaine Maxwell was the person who found them, groomed them, brought them into Jeffrey Epstein's orbit, and arranged their travel. Not only were there acts allegedly committed in the mansion in New York City, there were acts allegedly committed in Florida, at the ranch in New Hampshire. We have heard about the infamous island in the Caribbean, as well as acts in London. The acts in the United States territories and the states themselves are going to be enough should Ghislaine Maxwell decide to go to trial and should she be convicted, that she would do an extraordinary amount of time in prison. But one thing, Tanya, I found so interesting in this press conference was there are counts of perjury. And with the counts of perjury, a question was raised by a member of the press saying, well, does this foreclose cooperation if you've indicted her for perjury? And it was very smart. And in your graphic, you can see in count 5 and count 6 that there are perjury counts. That has to do with her deposition in a civil case back in 2016. So one of the things the acting U.S. Attorney, Audrey Strauss, said is that we often deal with cooperators who have been indicted for perjury. So the door is open that if Ghislaine Maxwell would like to spare these victims a trial, that there may be a way to work out a deal where she would do less time. It is hard for me to believe that they would let Ghislaine Maxwell walk out of there because she really was a co-conspirator, according to the government, with Jeffrey Epstein. Another thing, Tanya, if I may, they certainly left the door open when Audrey Strauss, the acting U.S. Attorney, said she'd really like to hear from Prince Andrew.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of people are curious about that connection as well. But Rikki, what can you tell us about how severe these charges are? Whether or not she cooperates, is she likely to do significant jail time?
Yes, I think that one of the reasons people have postured as to why Jeffrey Epstein may have committed suicide was the idea that there would be so much time that he couldn't face the fact that he was going to go to prison perhaps for the rest of his life. Well, when you look at the overriding conspiracy plus the underlying counts, we're not talking months here. We are talking a significant term of years.
All right. Well, Rikki Klieman, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your legal expertise. We really appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Tanya.